Ancient stories and warnings from past civilizations make up one very scary picture about the Earth's not-too-distant future. These stories all point to an imminent pole shift, the end of days for much of the world's population. Our entire civilization is on borrowed time. I will outline some of these warnings from the past, but I will also link them with recent scientific observations and key planetary warning indicators, which all appear to be largely consistent with the timelines given to us by our long-distant ancestors. Let's start with the Sumerians, who wrote their warnings on stone tablets so that they could be preserved for future generations. A well-known British archaeologist named Leonard Woolley spent 30 years excavating Sumerian archaeological sites such as in southern Iraq. He uncovered thousands of cuneiform tablets, many of which remain in museum collections today. It is amazing how much these ancient Sumerians knew about the Earth, planetary cycles, the sun, moon, and stars. It is fascinating and intriguing that an ancient culture knew so much about our planet and the solar system. However, they not only knew how our planet and the solar system interacted, but they also knew when the world as we know it would come to an end. This information was carved into one small 5,000-year-old tablet which was discovered in an isolated chamber in 1929, all on its own, deliberately given pride of place, which contains a gravely concerning message. Leonard Woolley called this the Countdown Stone and only revealed its existence 6 days before his death in 1952. Those that he discussed it with agreed that the translated text should never be revealed publicly. The reason why he called it the Countdown Stone was because the inscriptions on this stone are counting down to a planetary event which nobody can stop. Many experts believe this to be the next pole shift. Pole shifts occur as part of a regular repeating planetary cycle, and when they do, the majority of the human population dies, depending on their location. Some locations are safer than others. Food sources such as animals, flora, and fauna also die due to the associated floods, earthquakes, volcanoes, solar radiation, lack of magnetic guidance for insects, birds, sea life, etc. After each of these pole excursions, protection from our magnetosphere drops significantly, and climate disasters are experienced. However, gradually, the poles reset themselves in their new position, and over hundreds and thousands of years, populations rebuild and life re-establishes itself. The Countdown Stone has mysteriously disappeared. However, a Berlin-based researcher who has seen the stone published a translation of the writings on the internet within the last few years. However, suspiciously, for some unknown reason, the university removed this article from the website on the same day, but not before people had taken their own notes and made their own conclusions. The translation stated what many of us, suspicious observers, already know: that there is a constant repeating disaster cycle on planet Earth that results in a pole shift every 6,000 years, and the time frame given on the stone is predicted to occur sometime around 2030, imminently. This is something that we know previous civilizations have experienced, and it is something that we can predict. Stones such as the Countdown Stone were engraved as a warning to future generations. It outlines a number of pole shift warning signs experienced by the previous pole shift survivors, which are all consistent with other ancient stories. The sun not setting properly, the sun staying in the sky longer than it should do, the day-night cycle becoming erratic, birds falling from the sky, star constellations are visible in the wrong parts of the sky, and increasing earthquakes and volcanic activity. Birds would fall from the sky due to changes in the Earth's magnetic field, confusing their magnetic guidance. Star constellations being visible in the wrong parts of the sky would have been due to the tilting of the planet during a pole shift. Increasing earthquakes and volcanic activity are associated with Earth's crustal displacement during a pole shift. During a pole shift, the core of the Earth is unlocked and the outer crust is temporarily displaced. This phenomenon has resulted in shifts of entire continents in the past. As an example, Antarctica was once a warm and pleasant land before the last pole shift. These continents will again change position under the next upcoming and imminent magnetic pole shift. The Sumerian warnings are from just one of our ancient civilizations. There are countless others. Similar life and death cycles are well known in the Mesoamerican cultures too, such as the Mayans. The Mayans were an incredibly advanced civilization in terms of their understanding of sophisticated astronomy, mathematics, including the use of zero, hieroglyphic writing, monumental stone architecture, and the long count calendar. It is the long count calendar that is particularly interesting in relation to the upcoming magnetic pole shift. The Mayan long count calendar utilizes a very long cycle of the Earth, which predicted the end of civilization and a reset. Some of you may be thinking that this calendar has long since expired. The famous end date was reported to be 2012, and for that reason, the Mayans may have been wrong. I am sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but the problem was that the previous interpretation of the 2012 end date was wrong. This impending cataclysm and planetary reset will occur within the next decade or so, consistent with the timeframes of contemporary pole shift theory. I will now explain why this previous date was wrong. Firstly, the Mayans were incredibly thorough with all of their calculations. They did not make mistakes. They used 3 interlocking calendar systems: Tzolk'in, a 260-day sacred calendar; Hab, a 365-day solar calendar; Long count, a linear count of days extending over thousands of years. The long count calendar counted the number of days from a mythological creation date that corresponds, using the most widely accepted correlation, to August 11th, 3114 BC in the proleptic Gregorian calendar. This calendar utilizes long thousand-year cycles, which mark the ends and beginnings of the New World. The date for the end of the current civilization was predicted by modern-day researchers as 2012. Obviously, this passed with no cataclysm taking place. However, many very reputable researchers believe the famous 2012 date was calculated incorrectly, and that the real cataclysmic milestone will fall around 2047 instead. The scary thing is that this 2047 date is consistent with all of the current pole shift theories from people in the know. In fact, any date approaching 2030 and beyond falls in this critical doomsday timeframe. The discussion about the accuracy of the 2012 date comes from a debate over how we convert ancient Mayan calendar dates into our modern calendar. Basically, the Mayan long count calendar tracks days from a mythological starting point more than 5,000 years ago. Most archaeologists use a conversion method called the GMT correlation, which places the end of the 13th Baktun, a major calendar cycle, on December 21, 2012. However, not everyone agrees with that conversion. Some researchers argue that the GMT correlation is off by several decades. Using alternative calculations, they suggest the completion of the same cycle will occur much later, in around 2047, or possibly even before. This in itself is a game changer. We should all be very worried indeed. So, what is the GMT correlation? Well, in simple terms, the GMT correlation is the bridge. That lets historians convert a date in the Maya long count calendar into a date in our modern calendar. The letters GMT stand for 3 scholars who helped develop the correlation: Goodman, Martinez, Thompson. The reason that we need a correlation is because the Mayan long count counts the number of days since a mythical starting point. By itself, a long count date only tells you how many days have elapsed since that starting date. To know where that falls in our calendar, you need to know what modern date corresponds to day 0. Think of it like 2 rulers. Ruler A starts counting at one point. Ruler B starts counting at a different point. To convert measurements between them, you need to know the offset between their 0 marks. You probably want to know what a GMT value is. The standard GMT correlation uses the number 584,283. This is the number of days that separates the Mayan long count starting date from the astronomical Julian day count used by scholars. Using this correlation, Mayan long count 000 00 corresponds to August 11th, 3114 BCE in the proleptic Gregorian calendar. To get these numbers, researchers compared several kinds of evidence: Mayan inscriptions with recorded astronomical events, surviving Mayan calendar traditions, historical records from the early Spanish colonial period, especially those of Bishop Diego de Landa, Venus, solar and lunar observations recorded by the Maya. No single piece of evidence proves the answer by itself. However, the GMT correlation became widely accepted because it makes the different lines of evidence fit together reasonably well. It is by no means certain. However, certainty really is the sort of thing you want when predicting the end of our current civilization. Here is a simple analogy to explain the calculations. Imagine finding an old stopwatch that says an event happened 1 million seconds after the stopwatch was started. To know the actual date and time of the event, you first need to know when the stopwatch was set to 0. The GMT correlation is essentially historians' best guess or estimate of when the Mayan calendar's 0 point aligns with our calendar, allowing every long count date to be converted into a modern date. In terms of the 2012 example, the famous date, which passed without incidents, of 13.0.0.0.0 converts to 21st December 2012 only if you use the GMT correlation 584,283. However, a different correlation would place that same long count date on a different day and a different year entirely. The worrying thing about the Mayans is that they very precisely measured everything. They did not get things wrong. They did not make mistakes. Even though they lived many thousands of years ago, they were incredibly advanced. As mentioned previously, they used a 365-day solar calendar, which is what we still use today. And they had a very thorough understanding of elementary concepts such as planetary precession. Based on what they knew, the fact that 2012 has passed without consequence is more of a concern than ever before. We are the ones that have miscalculated, and the pole shift and global cataclysm is in all probability imminent. The year 2047 is the time frame we need to prepare for, if not before. And just remember that even 2047 is a modern-day estimate. In theory, it could happen any time from now onwards. Changes in the Earth's magnetic protection are already being observed. Our magnetosphere is almost 15% weaker than it was when Carl Friedrich Gauss first measured it in 1835, and this weakening is accelerating. The poles have begun migrating further and further apart, and this separation is speeding up, which has resulted in the South Atlantic anomaly, a hole in our protective magnetosphere, which has continued to grow in size. This hole has also begun splitting into two. We are seeing auroras further and further away from the equator. Earthquakes and volcanic activity have also started to increase. Solar radiation has been penetrating deeper and deeper into our atmosphere, damaging satellites and knocking out power grids. This is the beginning of the end times. A striking pattern begins to emerge when these ancient stories, calculations, and traditions are compared. Again and again, we encounter stories of great upheaval, floods, fire, earthquakes, darkness, or other overwhelming forces of nature. They often describe a small group of survivors that manage to live on somehow, preserve knowledge, and rebuild civilizations. Whether these accounts represent memories of real natural disasters, spiritual teachings, symbolic stories, or some combination of all three remains an open question. What is remarkable is that so many cultures remembered a time when everything changed. Another common theme is that catastrophe is often linked not simply to nature, but to humanity itself. Many traditions suggest that societies become arrogant, careless, or lose their connection with the natural or spiritual order before a period of destruction. Whether interpreted literally or metaphorically, the message is surprisingly consistent. Civilizations are not invincible. Prosperity can create complacency, and ignoring warning signs may carry consequences. Modern science paints its own picture of Earth's past. Geological evidence shows that our planet has experienced enormous floods, powerful earthquakes, volcanic super-eruptions, asteroid impacts, and rapid climate changes. Science tells us that Earth is capable of extraordinary change and that natural disasters have repeatedly shaped the course of human history. Perhaps the greatest lesson from these ancient traditions is that knowledge can be lost, landscapes can change, the assumptions of one generation can be overturned by the next. Whether these stories preserve distant memories of real events or enduring moral lessons, they remind us that humanity has always lived in a dynamic and sometimes unpredictable world. By listening carefully to both ancient traditions and modern science, we can gain a deeper appreciation of our past and a wiser perspective on our future. The Inuit are an indigenous people that live in the colder, more northern areas of our planet. The Inuit prophecy of the shifting Earth is another fascinating story which we can directly relate to pole shift theory. In ancient stories, the Inuit tell of a time when the Earth will shift and the balance between humans and spirits will collapse. This event marks the world's renewal but also its great trial. They believe that the old ways of survival and respect for the environment will become the key to enduring what comes next. The Inuit say that those who listen to the wisdom of the animals and the land will find guidance even in the darkest hour. There is no single Inuit prophecy about the end of the world, as the Inuit are made up of many different communities across Alaska, northern Canada, and Greenland, each with rich oral traditions rather than one unified mythology. However, from these stories, there are several important themes that are relevant to pole shift theory. 1. The world as we know it has ended before. Many Inuit stories describe previous ages of the Earth being destroyed and renewed. Rather than one final apocalypse, history is seen as cyclical. Some traditions tell of great floods, the land changing dramatically, the sky behaving differently, humanity surviving by adapting rather than through complete destruction. 2. The stories talk about the Earth becoming out of balance. Signs include animals behaving strangely, weather becoming unpredictable, hunting becoming difficult, seasons no longer arriving as expected. 3. Stories of the sky changing. Some Inuit traditions speak of unusual celestial events, the sun behaving differently, long periods of darkness or light, the stars being important signs. In terms of current concerns among the Inuit of the Arctic, elders have spoken of strange signs in the last few decades. The stars no longer appear where they once did, the ice melts faster, and the animals are changing their paths. They believe these are signs of a great turning point. Even Isaac Newton had an end-of-the-world prediction. Isaac Newton was an early scientist/astronomer, someone who was credited with first identifying the force of gravity. He used the Bible to calculate that the end of the world would come before the end of 2060. But why 2060? Newton's calculation came from interpreting symbolic time periods in the books of Daniel and Revelation. One of the key numbers is 1,260 prophetic days. Like many Protestant interpreters of his era, Newton treated those symbolic days as 1,260 years. He then chose a historical starting point related to the rise of papal authority and counted forward to estimate the earliest possible fulfillment. Newton's date would again appear to be generally consistent with many other ancient cataclysmic predictions and consistent with contemporary pole shift theory. And then there are the unusual symbols and signs and unexplained phenomena. Let's take crop circles for example. Some crop circle patterns have been decoded with AI and found to contain warnings of a future cataclysm. These warnings all point to a time in the not-too-distant future, sometime between 2030 and 2050. But where do the crop circles come from? Who makes them? Can we trust these predictions? And then there is the Booga sphere, which is an unexplained orb that was found in Booga, Colombia, South America. It was flying through the air under some unknown propulsion when it hit some power lines and came crashing down. The sphere was carbon dated and found to be 12,560 years old. Check out my video on the Booga sphere for more information. This sphere is definitely some kind of advanced technology. The ancient Sanskrit symbols were analyzed using AI programs and found to contain a prediction about the end of the world. When experts examined the Sanskrit symbols, most of them believed that they contain a warning about a significant astronomical or geophysical event in the future, such as a pole shift which could affect life on this planet. Its carbon dating, establishing its age as 12,560 years old, aligns with a previous magnetic pole shift and cataclysmic population-destroying event. Dr. Stephen Greer, a well-known ufologist, has hypothesized that these spheres, and several others that have been seen in Colombia around the same time, are related to significant field changes in South America, such as the South Atlantic anomaly, which could be early warning technology related to the upcoming magnetic pole shift and global catastrophe. Both Dr. Stephen Greer and Ross Coulthart also talk about the year 2027. They often get contacted by people in governmental and secret organizations, potential whistleblowers, and other officials with very high security clearance who have been hinting at something very serious that will happen in 2027. Some of these whistleblowers have cited 2027 as the next big pole shift. This date could better reflect the Mayan long count calendar endpoint. These whistleblowers and secret government officials have insisted that this event in 2027 is something that the general public must be aware of, something which they cannot divulge due to the various official secrets acts or non-disclosure agreements that they have signed up to. And then we have the scientific analysis of ancient lava flows, the study of the polarity of these igneous rocks. They all confirm, without a shadow of a doubt, that there is a repeating 6,000-year disaster cycle. The 6,000-year pole shift cycle is coordinated with the solar flare cycle of our Sun and the environmental cycles of our Earth. Ocean currents are also connected, such as the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, AMOC. Scientists are predicting a collapse of the AMOC in the coming years. This appears to be linked to the pole shift cycle. If this happens, the Earth could face extreme changes in climate, most likely an ice age. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of these ancient traditions is not that they all describe exactly the same event, but that so many of them speak of previous worlds, great floods, sudden upheavals, and the rebirth of civilization. These ancient stories have survived for thousands of years, passed from one generation to the next across continents and cultures. Then we turn to modern science and discover something equally remarkable. Around 12,900 years ago, during a period known as the Younger Dryas, Earth's climate changed with extraordinary speed. The exact cause remains the subject of scientific debate, but the event reminds us that our planet is capable of dramatic change over relatively short periods. When myths, archaeology, and geology all hint at a world that has changed dramatically before, they invite us to keep asking one of humanity's oldest questions. How much of our distant past provides warnings about events in our very near future? There are so many intertwined and consistent stories from the past, which are consistent with emerging science. And, as I said before, the Mayans never made mistakes. The long count calendar is nearly at its end. Whether it's 2027 or 2047, the pole shift and global reset is something that we will all be alive to witness. The poles are moving, the environment is changing. A significant global event is on the horizon, and we all need to be prepared. Thank you for watching, and please feel free to spread the word. Also, you can subscribe to this channel if you want to receive more information and updates regarding the imminent magnetic pole shift.